So now I use 1 more tablespoon, and that is perfect. And look at the dark rich color. And that's not with using a dark roux either, because those bones that I used were nice and dark, and all the vegetables. So we're skipping a step here because I had all my vegetables in there, and we're going to go straight to making from this a finished sauce. So there you go. You wind up with just about a quart of a rich beef stock. Which gives us this nice 1 quart of espagnole or demi-glace, but it's only beef, there's no veal in there. This recipe is for making a basic brown sauce that's going to be used to make other sauces beef only, for all beef dishes. This was made from fresh beef stock, which I have a recipe. What you see on the top is the fat from the beef bones, which I'm going to save and use that to make the roux to thicken the stock. Since the stock was sitting in the refrigerator overnight, the fat is fairly hard, so I'm using a fork to take it off, because really all I want is the fat. So after I do that, I will heat it up. Now that I have all the fat plus a little bit of the sauce, once this gets hot, I'll heat it up a little more so the sauce evaporates, and all I have left is the fat. And I'm going to add flour to the fat and make the roux. But meanwhile, the amount of stock that I have, it hasn't gelled, and it's a little too light in flavor, which means it has to be reduced. So I'll go about doing that first. Now, to reduce the sauce, it's better to use a wide pot than a tall one. The flame will stay under the pot, so I'm going to keep more of the heat from the gas burner instead of losing it going up the side of a tall pot. Now I'm going to reduce this until it has a nice flavor. Once it has a nice flavor and it tastes like a beautiful beef stock should taste, then we'll go about thickening it. So this will take me a little while. Okay, now this roast beef, I should say the fat from the beef bones, it's just about all fat in there. You can see straight through to the bottom. And I'm going to add enough flour, mix it up. We're going to have to add a lot more. And we're going to cook it here just for a few minutes. Just add enough so this isn't too thick and not too runny. You don't want a runny roux, even though it might be easier to work with. That means the thickening, it's less thickening agent in there and more fat going into the sauce. Now that's way too thin. Now you're going to have too much for the application that we're going to do, but if you want, you could always save this. Let's say you buy, make your own beef stock, or you're going to buy some beef consommé, beef broth. Saving this is no problem. Just put it in a little plastic container, throw it in the freezer. and then whenever you need it, just take it out. So we're going to cook this a little bit, not much. I'm not trying to make a brown roux like in Cajun cooking. A little pale in color will do just fine. You can either cook this in the oven a little bit, or we'll do it on top of the stove. See, now that consistency is okay. Because when you whip it into the sauce, into the stock, you shouldn't see any lumps. And then when you strain it, it should be fairly smooth. So that's the amount we're going to have. Just cook that for a few minutes. Don't let it really brown. Well, that's enough of the cooking of the roux. So we have what is known as, like, this is a blonde roux. It's not pure white, so it's not a white roux. And it certainly isn't a dark roux like used for making gumbos. So that's that. Now we have to go about thickening the 1 quart of beef stock that was freshly made, or your 1 quart of store-bought beef consommé, beef broth. So I put a little sauce pot up. Make sure the pot that you're going to use is not one of those tin line pots. You don't want to scorch anything. So we'll put the quart of, see, this is going to be a little dangerous, but I can handle it. It's really the next size up was a little too large for me for the demonstration, and this way it'll work out just fine. So the roux, when it's added to this has to simmer first. As soon as this begins to boil, cut it down to a simmer and add the warm roux to it. It will just blend in much better with it. So we'll wait until this comes to a little boil. Now we're going to be exact here with the roux. Now if you make a roux that looks like this, and no thinner and no thicker then the amount used for 1 quart will always be the same. But if you make this roux any thicker than this, of course, if you use the measured amount we're using now for the quart, the sauce will be too thick. And if it's much thinner than this, it'll be a little thin. But really, a little bit here and there, as long as it's not too thick. The thinness we can live with. You can always add a drop more. Let it boil, wait a few minutes, because as this cooks, the roux, it becomes thicker and thicker. Not like if you use cornstarch, where once it comes to a boil, that's it. And you wouldn't use cornstarch with this either, for the simple reason, well, you could. It'll keep the same color. This will lighten it slightly, the roux, but the texture is going to be better. Okay, now we're going to be exact here with the roux. So I have a tablespoon. And I'm just guessing. I'd say 3 tablespoons should do it, but we're going to add it slowly, just to make sure. And we'll whip it in. Notice you don't see any lumps. A lot of people I've seen take the roux cold from like underneath the table in the kitchen and add it to the sauce, but if you heat it up, it just works a little, it just works better. hot to hot. So that's 3. Now I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait for this to come to a boil. After it comes to boil, simmer it for a few minutes and then check the consistency. Well, that's well blended, that's for sure. And just to make sure, when you're doing things like this, just take the spoon and run it around the edge on the bottom. Because sometimes roux collects there, because the whip is round and the pot is not round on the bottom, unless you use a round bottom pot. But a lot of them aren't. So we'll let this come to a boil and wait.